Our keynote speaker today is Dr. James R. Davis. And you heard a little bit about, you might have heard Jennifer mention his name in her talk yesterday. Dr. James Davis is the son of Peggy Davis and brother of Christy Davis. Peggy Davis is our first legacy guardian, so he is coming to talk to us about growing up with Christy and how his life was really transformed by being an NBI sibling and living in that light. So I'd like to go ahead and welcome James Davis.
What a cute kid, right? This is the room where Christy and I spent a lot of time, and it's the place that I first remember acknowledging that I had a sister. This was a great space for us. It was a safe space. But it was also the place of one of the most painful moments of my life. It was just after Christmas. During that weird week between Christmas and New Year when the whole world seems to take a little break from the hectic 51 weeks of the year. And I remember Santa had been pretty good to us that year. I had gotten a new Hot Wheels racetrack with super stunt loop and death-defying jump. Christy had a new assortment of dolls, including one pretty elegantly dressed Barbie. And as was normal for us, we sat in that room and we played near each other. And we did this for a while until I started to have some thoughts. I started to think, maybe these drivers need a bigger challenge. Maybe it's not enough for them to make a loop and do a jump. Maybe they should jump over something. Those of you in the room that are as old as I am know that I had seen Evel Knievel do this on his motorcycle. And so I thought, what? What could it be? Well, then it came to me. It had to be Barbie. She already had the outfit, so she was ready for prime time. And so I reached over and took her from Christy's hand, and I put her on the track, and then I went over to the nightstand and got the driver ready, and I was about to release my hand from the driver, and everything went black. Stars entered my vision as I released a piercing wail, and fire consumed my entire body, localized right between my shoulder blades. I heard someone scream, "No, Damie!" And then I turned around and came to, and that's when I saw her, her hand poised to strike again, clearly protective of Barbie. Thankfully, at that moment, our mother Peggy came rushing into the room to save me from the epic ass-kicking I had just received. You know, I can still point to the exact spot where she walloped me, and to this day, I walk a wide path around Barbie. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me today. Today I'm going to tell you the story of two significant women in my life whose impact influenced the development of my values, my beliefs, and my very identity. One is my mother, Peggy Davis, who many of you may know because of the recent legacy gift given in her name. But the other one is my big sister, Christy Davis, whose impact and lessons have been both numerous and significant, influencing the pathways that I followed, which eventually brought me here today. Now, as I share some of our stories and some embarrassing photos, I really hope to provoke thought such that we may all consider the power of authentic engagement, community, perseverance, and the malleability of what it means to be normal. So, quite simply, my mother and I had a complicated and constantly evolving relationship. Suffice it to say, we had some divergent beliefs. Most notable among them was her belief that she be over-involved in every minute aspect of my life for my entire life, and my belief that I'd be totally independent from the time I took my first breath. You know, mothers and sons, I suppose. But it turns out that her over-involvement in my life was a key factor which pushed me to question things that I don't understand, to seek out information grounded in fact instead of readily accepting the status quo. What Peggy did was provoke a visceral desire in me for independence and freedom, mostly from her imposing beliefs. Now, I realize this may sound harsh to some, but as it turns out, apples don't fall far from trees. Now, I want to pause here for a moment and just tell everybody that I am incapable of talking about my mother without sometimes imitating her accent, which was just a quintessential part of her charm. So I hope you'll indulge me if my voice all of a sudden becomes a Southern Belle woman. So here we go. So Peggy Louise Hopper, her maiden name, born in 1936, just up the road here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And she was raised in the 40s and 50s to conservative Southern Baptist parents. Little interesting factoid is that she was a true Peggy. She was not a Margaret, which is sometimes shortened to Peggy. Now, her father, Dan, pictured here, very conservative Southern Baptist man, he believed a woman should aspire to marriage, full stop. So imagine when 18-year-old Peggy approached him and said she wanted to go to college. He wasn't having it. Well, Peggy didn't want his beliefs imposed on her, so she took matters into her own hands, got a job at a grocery store, and saved money to pay her own tuition, where she attended Queens College of Charlotte to get her bachelor's degree, and then went on to Presbyterian Hospital Nursing School to become a registered nurse. Her father said to her at graduation, "Fine, you did it. Now, go get married." Well, Peggy had thoughts. She still wasn't ready. She wanted to see what was beyond Charlotte, to be independent. So she once again resisted her father's beliefs. One evening, she said that she sat down with him to try to explain things. And she said, "Daddy, I want to see the world. And so today, I joined the Navy." Over my dead body. You see, my grandfather believed that the Navy was where women of questionable character went to escape incarceration. Well, Peggy tried to explain to him it wasn't going to be like that for her. She was going to be a member of the officer corps and be a Navy nurse. And he wasn't buying it. He kept pressing, saying, it's not normal for a woman not to get married. So Peggy just smiled and looked at him and said, "You know what, Daddy, I'm sorry, but it's done. I've signed the papers and I'm going." And she did. Well, apparently my grandfather was not one to really express his emotions verbally, but his face could always tell a story. So sometime later, when Peggy came back from basic training, she stepped off the plane in her dress uniform, and she said she caught her father's gaze from the gallery below, and their eyes locked for a moment, and she saw an expression of pride across his face and a tear in his eye. And though he never said it, and they never spoke of that moment, she said she knew he finally understood. Peggy was a pioneer in her family. She was the first to attend college, the first woman to serve in the military, and the first in her family to break free of the status quo of the era by claiming her independence and freedom. She redefined what normal was in her family and made decisions about her own life. And so that, folks, is the tree from which this apple fell. So she was deployed to Japan. She spent years at a naval hospital, and that's where she met my dad, Bill. He was an up-and-coming cardiologist and marine aviator who was serving as a flight surgeon for both Marine and Naval air squadrons. They dated, they courted, they eventually moved back to the United States, settling in Southern California, where Dad worked out at Miramar Naval Air Station and Mom worked at the Balboa Naval Hospital. Eventually, they married in February of 1969, and just a couple of days after their first wedding anniversary, my big sister shows up. Now, in the 70s, when Christy was born, Peggy had to resign her commission in the Navy because there was no such thing as maternity leave for women in the military. And so Peggy became a stay-at-home mother to look after her newborn baby. And as she told me, she began to suspect something was different about Christy before she turned a year old. She noticed that her neurological and her fine motor development weren't progressing along the normal scale of things. She wasn't rolling over at that time when babies are supposed to be rolling over. She wasn't crawling at that time when babies should start crawling. And when, by her first birthday, she seemed to be struggling to stand and walk, she took her in and had her evaluated, and that's when she was diagnosed as intellectually disabled. But Peggy was strong, she was tenacious, and so while she was trying to come to terms with this new normal and understand more about her daughter's diagnosis, an accident happened. Oops. Nevertheless, here I came in December of the same year. And so Peggy had her hands full. She has a 22-month-old disabled daughter and a new infant. But just as she was in her own life, she found a way. This innate drive that Peggy had, coupled with her medical background, made her a staunch champion for Christy, and for me, mostly for Christy. And she believed that she deserved the best medical care, and she was the right person to find it. A few years later, Dad left. And that's when Peggy started her business. It was a company at the forefront of a radical change in healthcare. And to her last breath, she said she only did it because she needed to take care of her children. She needed it so we could survive. But the business, now that you know a little bit about Peggy and her drive, was wildly successful, and we thrived. So with Dad gone, normal for our family was redefined. As the kids say today, life kept lifing. And so one of the impacts of Christy, one of the first impacts of Christy on my life, was that I experienced behavioral normalization. Now, this is a social process that occurs when, through regular exposure to something, we accept things that may initially appear different. Well, this can lead to the development of healthy coping mechanisms, encourages positive behavioral changes, and improved well-being. In short, we gain depth as humans because we understand that we don't all have to be the same to have value. Our family life was normal because it's all we knew. As the years passed, Peggy remained focused on her business as it was the sole means of support for us. But as the company grew, she began traveling. At first, we would either stay with her brother or our grandmother, but finding appropriate care for Christy was a challenge. Peggy was eventually forced to accept that she couldn't provide the level of care Christy needed and continue to run this growing company, which we needed. She had to make a very difficult decision, but one that would put her daughter's well-being first, which was just so Peggy. She learned of a residential facility through some of her professional contacts, and it was called Howell Center. It was up in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and it came highly recommended, but it also had a waiting list. So Peggy put Christy on the list, and then life kept lifing for us. And it was about 2 years later that we got a call that would change our lives again. I remember that it was summer vacation. I was in her office doing, helping with odd jobs as you do when you're 12 in sort of a de facto childcare situation. And I was sitting at a small conference table with a deck of cards while she was busy running her business. Not really paying attention to anything, but I knew this call had something to do with Christy. And when she hung up, she called out with a little quiver in her voice, "Polly, I'm going to need a few minutes." And then she said, "James, please close the door." And I knew she meant business, so I closed the door, and when I turned around, I saw her sitting at her desk, upright, hands folded, tears coming down her face. Somehow I knew what that call was. A place had become available for Christy, and Peggy was taking a moment to feel and to acknowledge that while she was doing the very best for her daughter, Christy wouldn't be living with us anymore. She'd be in a facility 5 hours away. Still, I remember Howell Center being a pretty great place, and Christy seemed to thrive. She even became a Girl Scout, and I probably gained 10 pounds that year. I was her best cookie customer. Thin Mints, and then the peanut butter ones, I think they've changed names, all day. So there was a guest house you see in the center here called the Robin's Nest, because they called it the Robin's Nest because the whole place was decorated in birds, flora, fauna, all of the things. It was a really bright, lovely facility. And we could go up and take use of this house on weekends, and we would do it at least once a month, and we could bring Christy down to the house with us, and we could have pajama night with popcorn and movies, or be a family, and so we once again redefined how normal worked for us. Well, fast forward several years to the late 90s. Christy is in her early 20s, and Peggy began to notice that her movements were becoming more rigid, and she was having emotional outbursts, which were uncommon for this exceedingly happy girl that found nearly everything funny. Well, these changes prompted Peggy to have an evaluation and a brain MRI scan, and the scan revealed the specific finding of iron in a location and pattern which is common of the disorder. And it was soon after that that Peggy was introduced to Dr. Susan Hayflick and Patricia Wood, and from that moment, Dr. Hayflick and NBIA became household names for us, and Peggy became and remained a staunch champion of Dr. Hayflick's research and this association. Now, in 2003, my family, along with about a dozen others, was among the early seminal samples of Dr. Hayflick's gene analysis research, which helped identify the spontaneous change in DNA, which is a marker of BPAN. For us to be included in this study, all members of our immediate family had to give a blood sample. Well, this posed a big challenge for Peggy. To say that my parents' divorce was contentious is quite possibly the understatement of the century. To this day, my dad will not come east of the Mississippi River because he says that's her half of the country. So I remember one afternoon sitting in the little den with Peggy, and she's telling me about this story, and she's very animated. She's very excited about this study. And when she's finished, she says, James, what do you think I can do to convince him to be a part of this? It's very important. And I kind of looked at her and had a little grin, and I said, so let me get this straight. You want his blood? And she just, we had a little laugh. You had to be there. And I said, look, I'm your approach. I'll just go get it. And she said, you can do that? And I said, yep. He's not going to tell me no. I'm not going to give him a chance to say no. I said, it's for Christy. She was the one thing upon which Peggy and I could always agree. Through my parents' divorce, I learned how to manipulate my father and my mother. It is not a skill of which I am proud, but it's one I needed for my own survival, and it came in handy from time to time. So we got a collection kit from Dr. Hayflick. I arranged for a business trip to San Diego, flew out, showed up at Dad's door and said, hey, Dad, let's have lunch. And then I went to work. I was like, Dad, you haven't done much for Christy, but you have a chance to do something super awesome right now. We have a chance to be part of a genetic study that may identify the cause of a condition or a disorder that Christy has. And because it's genetic, I could have it too. And so I really want to know. Now, as a physician and a scientist, probably the best physician and scientist I've ever known, do you see what I'm doing? Compliment a narcissist, works every time. You should want to be part of this. I said, so all we have to do is a blood draw. Here's my arm. I know, being a doctor and all, you have to have a kit somewhere you can do this. And we'll just need to get one from you. And he didn't say no. He said, sure, I'll draw your blood. We'll just have to figure out how to get mine. And I said, you know what? Why don't I do it? I said, I'm sure a physician as fine and skilled and masterful as you could talk me through it, just like you would talk me through landing an A4 fighter on a very short runway. He grinned. I won. The samples went into FedEx that very day. Now, when I left there, I thought I had done something extraordinary, surmounted some great big challenge. But it turns out I was just demonstrating another impact of Christy on my life. and that's increased prosocial behavior, which are behaviors that are intended to benefit others. Now, as Christy's brother, these behaviors have scientific foundation. A group of Polish researchers conducted a study in 2015 that concluded that non-disabled siblings of disabled persons may facilitate greater prosocial behaviors. Their study suggests that prosocial tendencies are prompted by experiencing stressful situations in a family context. Well, we certainly had those. Some additional researchers concluded that the act of helping other people provides a distraction from the stressful situations and gives one a feeling of purposefulness, which contributes to greater self-worth and may lead to becoming more empathetic, accepting, kind, and emotionally intelligent adults. So when it comes to our identity, switching gears, it's kind of an abrupt switch, but we're switching. None of us is just one thing. We all have multifacets, and we possess several identities. Some we choose. We try on identities throughout our lives. Does this fit me? Yep, I'm going to keep it. Does this fit me? No, I'm going to shed it. Some of our identities are cast upon us, yet each of them impacts the way in which we experience the world around us. Here's what I mean. I identify as a dog judge. I have a license from the American Kennel Club to judge 20-some-odd breeds of dogs. Well, I chose this identity for myself after spending 25 years in the sport of showing and breeding purebred dogs, applying for the license, sitting for multiple exams, all of the things. Well, what that means is that if we walk down the street together, I'm probably going to experience dogs in a different way than you. Let's take a Labrador. Oh, it's so cute, it's got that big waggy tail. That's what's in your head. In my head, it's like, well, the coat's kind of soft, it's kind of fat, the back skull's a little narrow. That's what's going to be in my head. Some identities we did not choose. I mean, as you can see from these pictures, and standing in front of you today, I'm a tall white guy. Well, my tall identity means that I experience the world different than you do. For example, this morning in the hotel bathroom, I had to stand like this to be able to see in the mirror above the sink. I also could bump my head from time to time on things that you would never think that you bump your head on. But I'm also forced to answer the question 800 times a year, do you play basketball? To which 800 times a year I say, no, do you play miniature golf? The point is, our life experiences are informed by our identities, and we each experience the world in a different way, but one that feels normal to us. Another of my unchosen identities is that I am, as Amber said, the sibling of a person with disabilities. Now, the context and the impact of this identity is different from all of my other identities, and I believe it's one that I share with many people in the room today. As a group, siblings have been somewhat overlooked by researchers of disability-supporting entities. Articles about living with a disability are often focused on the individual or their parents or even a spouse. But I think our perspective is pretty important too. I came across this interesting article called 5 Things Only the Sibling of a Disabled Person Would Know. And when I read it, I kind of felt seen. And so I want to run through these quickly and ask that if you're a sibling, see how many of these resonate with you. So the first thing that this article says that we siblings know is that we sort of adopt this role of bodyguard, or this overwhelming urge to protect and defend our sibling. I would maintain that my trip out west to jam a needle in my father's arm could have stemmed from this bodyguard role, where I felt the need to advocate for Christy because she couldn't do it for herself. The second thing we siblings supposedly are aware of is that we are constantly aware of accessibility accommodations, and this tends to occur regardless of whether we're with our siblings or not. When we enter a facility, we notice whether there are ramps or lifts, where are the curb cuts, where are the disabled parking spaces. And it goes beyond just physical access, it's also an awareness of attitudes. Some years ago, I went to get my hair cut, and as I arrived at the salon, there was a Lamborghini in suburban Boston, whatever, parked across multiple disabled parking spaces in a pretty empty parking lot as well. So I walk in and I said to the lady at the desk, I said, hey, whose car is that? And a gentleman stands up, he's getting the cape taken off of him, all done with his haircut. He says, yeah, it's mine. And I went over and I said, you know, it's really pretty, and I'm sure you're quite proud of it. I said, but do you have the requisite placard to park in disabled spots? He's like, all right, dude, it's fine. I was running late. The parking lot's empty. It's all cool. And I just looked at him and said, you know, I understand what it's like to be running late. It's an awful feeling. But could I please ask that you just be a little more aware next time? I have a sister that's got some mobility challenges, and finding a spot like that, even when the parking lot is empty, is just super helpful. I'd appreciate it. Kind of ended there. He kind of just shrugged and said, all right, dude, I just didn't think anybody would say anything. Well, it turns out the bodyguard speaks up. So it ended there. The third thing the article suggests that we know is about our own inner struggle. Now, this is an emotional and mental conflict of wanting equal attention from our parents while understanding that our sibling needs it more. I dealt with this exact struggle well into my teens. I would often feel abandoned, sad, angry, and guilty all at the same time for feeling sad, abandoned, and angry. I cannot pinpoint an event or a moment that prompted enlightenment, but I did eventually come to realize that Peggy's love for us was not a pie. There wasn't a finite amount to go around. Christy got more because she needed it. The fourth thing siblings supposedly know is the unspoken rule that if you are a non-disabled sibling of a disabled person, an assumption constantly lingers that one day we will step into the primary care role of our sibling. Now, while it may be said that all families feel this duty of care towards one another, many don't anticipate that duty until it actually happens. But if you are the sibling of a disabled person, that thought is ever present. When I met the person that I eventually married, it's been almost 26 years now, we had a conversation early in our relationship where I brought up my sister, and I knew that any disagreement or resistance to her, the dating would stop. I'm not sure those kinds of conversations happen with regard to aging parents. Finally, the fifth thing we know is that other people have opinions, and they're not afraid to voice them. My friend Dina has this saying that I've stolen from her. She says, you can't teach self-awareness. And I kind of think, yeah, if only you could. There's something about people not knowing when to keep their mouths shut. At a church event, many, many years ago, I was sitting at a table sharing one piece of cake with Christy. We were the best when it came to cake because she actually liked the cake part and I just liked the frosting. So we would sit there sharing the cake. Now, I would control the fork because if I didn't, this is what would end up on the plate. So I would control the fork and cut off a piece of cake. I would feed it to her. After every bite, she'd grin, cake would come out of her teeth, she would laugh, and I would scrape up the frosting and eat it. And it was our process. I still can't eat cake today without thinking, that's Christy's part, just give me the frosting. So we had our one piece of cake, and then when I finished, I took our plate to the trash and threw it away, and I caught a glimpse of someone out of the corner of my eye, a woman waving at me. That's the international symbol for please come here, in case you didn't know. And I walked over a little hesitantly thinking, what's this gonna be? And as I approached, big smile on her face, she said, I've been watching you with that retarded girl. You are so good with her. How'd you get to be so good like that? Well, one, retarded is a trigger word for me. I think we should all write it on a sheet of paper, crumble it up, and throw it away. Never say it again. Two, I had had a lot of frosting. And so I just, without thinking, I just said, I'm sorry? What is that supposed to mean? Why do you think you can talk to me like that? I said, she is my sister. She's not a basketball. And I'll thank you not to use that word. And I spun on my heels, Apparently that's not something you're supposed to say to people in church, but I did. I spun on my heels, I went back, I picked up Christy, and I walked away. Christy's bodyguard used kind of as a hothead, if you haven't picked up on that. I defend her without fail. And we left. I never went back to that church. I've spoken a little bit about context today. Context is background information. It allows for accurate interpretation and understanding of situations, and it gives meaning. And I think folks like the aforementioned church lady who make random comments, they often lack valuable context. You see, what she doesn't know and what others don't know is that in that blue bedroom where I got my ass kicked all those years ago, there had been countless brother and sister interactions between Christy and me. In these moments, learning was also taking place. Not only did she and I become connected in an indescribable way that I think only my fellow siblings here can understand, but my values and my beliefs were being established. Specifically, my belief and understanding of what is normal. Because to me, she's always going to be just Christy. Just Christy. My joyful, laughing, loving, sweet, kind, annoying, strong, and sometimes violent sister. I now know that what triggers me in those moments with other people's words is not their words, but it's their challenge of my worldview. Because normal, you see, is a social construct. Things that appear different to society's collective agreement of normal are often viewed negatively, and they sometimes elicit comments that may seem harmless to the person uttering them, but are received as disparaging to those who receive them. It's intention versus impact. Well, a group of researchers in Brazil studied the perceptions of siblings of disabled persons and found that we intrinsically perceive our brothers and sisters as normal, given their behavior, their way of being, and their intellectual capacity. Despite any learning or mobility limitations, we don't see them as different, and we unlink the idea of disability being associated with abnormality or disease. It means that we see the whole person instead of zeroing in on their disability. Well, thanks to that perspective that I got from my sister, I was influenced to claim yet another identity as an academic. My doctoral program at Vanderbilt had this really cool component. Not only did we have to conduct original research, but we had to show application of that research beyond academia. And so after years of studying leadership, organizational change, and learning, I teamed up with these two wonderful ladies, and we connected with two disability advocacy organizations. One is the FISA Foundation in Pittsburgh, the other is Disability Lead in Chicago, and both of them were interested in evaluating leadership development programs for the disabled community. And I want to share just a couple slides about our research. So we grounded our evaluation in the academic literature, and we found three emerging themes or barriers to leadership opportunities for the disabled community. The first barrier is that just having a disability is a barrier to leadership because society largely associates disability with abnormality, and it fails to prepare individuals to assume leadership roles. The second barrier is that within the realm of leadership as a practice, disabled persons are commonly framed as the beneficiaries of leadership rather than as exercising leadership. And third, where there is leadership development, it's primarily focused on self-advocacy or caring for one's own needs. Well, we were curious why these barriers exist and how can they be removed? So we examined two existing theories of disability, the medical model and the social model. Well, the medical model of disability takes a deficit-based approach. It places emphasis on the limited abilities of an individual. In contrast, the social model acknowledges that society built the world around us with features that limit access to participation, like building stairs instead of ramps. Well, the social model should lead us to see people in a more equal way and empower society to take appropriate action to design both physical and metaphorical spaces in more inclusive ways. However, these two models have impacted the way we view disability with respect to leadership. So we came up with a framework for disruption. Building from the social model, we suggested that self-advocacy is a form of leadership in an individual capacity. When disabled persons master self-advocacy, they may be provided with an opportunity to lead within their community by engaging as advocates for others with a like disability. Here, they can impact the community level, speaking on behalf of the disability community and its needs, which is another form of leadership. But we found that above this community-based leadership, there exists an invisible ceiling of expectations where we do not expect to see disabled persons leading in society in non-disabled contexts. These individuals are still anomalies. Only once this ceiling is broken and we can see the presence of leaders of all types of communities, causes, and organizations while owning their identity as disabled, can we expect to see true disruption. Leading at this level, living openly with one's disability, can truly support the structural and authentic inclusion that will advance the betterment of us all. I'm really quite proud of this work and the fact that FISA and Disability Lead are maintaining their partnership and establishing programs that are both for and run by members of the disabled community and making great inroads in this area. This is just one of the ways that I have chosen to honor my sister. Now, while the disability community certainly needs our support, so does the rare disease research community. And I feel I would be remiss not to spend just a moment talking about legacy giving and its impact. It's something that each of us can do to honor those whom we've lost, but potentially provide those who remain with some comfort and support, hopefully even some answers. The work of this association and Oregon Health Science University, it's not just about research or policy. I mean, this room is proof of that. It's about real people, real families, real change. Peggy knew that advocacy needs funding and research needs funding. Her legacy gift was designed to support both. You're probably aware of the $250,000 that she left for this association. Well, that's just a portion of the total charitable remainder trust that she established. The other was $750,000 in unrestricted funding for Dr. Havlik and her research. Money makes scientific work go faster. It provides for talent, people, supplies, and it allows researchers to focus on the research rather than getting bogged down in administrative tasks like grant writing. The 2022 Legacy Giving Report indicates that only 6% of Americans make a provision for legacy giving in their will. But this same report reveals that if asked, over 30% said they would. That's a potential increase of 400%. So if it's just a question of not being asked, please consider this your ask. Financial support is needed to contribute to this critical advocacy and research work. I called my attorney, set up legacy giving. It was so easy to do. Even a small contribution, when combined with others, can create significant change. And I hope that my family's gift will prompt you to leave a legacy of your own. We lost Christy on September the 11th, 2011. I'll never be a parent, so I cannot even fathom the excruciating experience of losing a child and losing a child that's just so innocent, so joyful, doesn't know sin. I do know Peggy was never the same. I lost a piece of my soul that day. But Christy's spirit lives on in the undeniable impact she had on my life and many lives. She shaped who I am and is proof that a single person can make a difference. You know, about a year after Christy passed, Peggy got a call from Allison Gregory with the news that the specific gene which caused Christy's disease had been identified. And this meant that additional focused research could be conducted to learn even more. And even though Christy had passed, Peggy was grateful for the news and found comfort in it because it meant that Christy's impact went beyond just our family by contributing to this important research. Here's how I dedicated my doctoral dissertation. To my big sister, Christy Davis, you taught me that different is strong, not wrong. To seek joy and laughter, to persevere despite seemingly insurmountable circumstances, and to love. Though you left us too soon, your impact is lasting, and your light guides my way. Once again, thank you all for letting me speak to you today. I hope that as we leave this session and go forward, we all continue to make an impact, inspire change, and reimagine normal as diverse, empowered, and unstoppable.